Have you ever asked yourself why it's important that we live a good and righteous life in the here and now? Not only when we're trying to impress someone else, but when we're alone and by ourselves. And I say that because if we would only admit it to ourselves, if we would be honest with ourselves, we have all done things or thought things which were wrong, of which no one else knows. We have all committed sins of only which we and God know. Why is it important that we overcome these personal problems and live a good and righteous life in the here and now? And how do we accomplish that? How do we accomplish that in the busy world in which we live? We find ourselves seeking the wisdom and the knowledge of the world so we can get ahead and strive to have all those material things that we seek as humans. And I might add, there's nothing wrong with material things. It's only that they can hinder us. They can hinder us if we let them in seeking them from living that good and righteous life in the here and now. Let's go to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Now, as you read through Ecclesiastes, and of course we don't have time to read it all today, but Solomon evidently wrote Ecclesiastes in his later years. And he's telling us, he's showing humanity, or the people he's talking to, what not to do. I mean, he did all these things, but he's telling us that's not the way to go, even though he did it. It's not the things to do. Starting in Ecclesiastes 1, verse 12 through 15 here. It says, I, the preacher, was king over Jerusalem, and I gave my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. He says, this is a sore travail that God has given the sons of man to be busied with. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of the spirit. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. Solomon tells us all these things in which mankind strives to do and busies himself with. And I want to emphasize here, as you read on through Ecclesiastes, you can see that he's talking about worldly wisdom here. He's talking about all the things that people seek out here in the world. Let me see. He's telling us that the things which mankind strives to do and busies himself with are only things which irritates and annoys the spirit. In effect, all these things we strive to do in life works against the spirit, for they take us away from what we need to be focusing on. Those things that are more important. Now, no matter how hard we strive and work, we cannot solve the world's problems. Verse 16, he says, I commune with mine own heart, saying, Lo, I have come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Now, there's nothing wrong with knowledge. There's nothing wrong with wisdom, if you can learn how to focus that knowledge and focus that wisdom. I personally value wisdom and knowledge, except only in the last few years have I learned to focus that knowledge and wisdom in the right direction. And unlike Solomon, who had all the resources anyone could ever need in which to seek wisdom, what little I've learned, I learned in the school of hard knocks. For my parents were poor and they couldn't send me to a good college. And some of the important things in life I've had to learn the hard way. And some of those things I've had to learn on my own. And, you know, I come upon Solomon here, a man who spent his whole life in pursuing knowledge. And he had all the power and all the money to do so, unlike me. But he was seeking worldly knowledge. Most of what he was seeking was worldly knowledge. And one advantage we have over Solomon is he didn't have the technology we have today. He said, I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. And then he said, I perceive that this is also vexation of the spirit. This, he says, is against the spirit, or something to annoy the spirit. He says over in chapter 5:15, it's like laboring for the wind, grasping after the wind. He says, I worked so hard to get it, and when I got it, it didn't mean anything more than a hill of beans. Handful of wind. And you know, folks, that's the way it is with worldly wisdom. In the end, it don't amount to much. And Solomon, as I say, he evidently wrote this in his later years, because as I grow older, I can look back and I can see some of the things that I pursued, they wasn't worth a hill of beans either. It was, you know, it's for nothing. Now, Mr. Smith mentioned Einstein in his sermon last week. The man was a genius in physics, but when he died just the same as the fool, didn't he? No difference. Solomon tells us in verse 18 here, he says, for in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increases knowledge increases sorrow. And that's what the wisdom of this world has brought us, people. Nothing but grief and sorrow. The Chinese, they say, invented gunpowder, as we refer to it. Of course, it wasn't called gunpowder then, until someone invented the gun. Mankind then used that gun, which is innocence of itself, to kill other people by the millions. And mankind has refined the art of making gunpowder to a much higher and proficient degree. The powder made today is much more powerful than the old black powder made by the Chinese, that the Chinese invented. The powder today is smokeless. It won't corrode your gun barrel. When using black powder, you had to wait till the smoke cleared before you could see whether you hit what you shot at or not. And it would corrode your gun barrel unless you cleaned it after each use. Don't have to do that with modern day powder. Then came the rockets, the mortars, the big tank guns, and the bombs, and the big guns on the aircraft carriers, all powered by an invention which was intentionally invented for good. Wisdom intended for good, but it has brought nothing but grief, as Solomon says, sorrow and grief. Then along came Einstein and all his fellow cohorts with their quantum physics. They learned how to split the atom, something so small you can't see it with the naked eye. Oh, it was good for atomic power to create electricity for the great masses, but it didn't stop there, did it? No, we went on to create the atomic bomb, then the nuclear bomb, which was even more powerful. And now we have all the power to kill off every human being on the face of the planet 10 times over. With much wisdom, there is much grief. And now we're looking at a madman over there in North Korea who's just crazy enough to use it. You know, much wisdom. That is the wisdom of the world, and it brings much grief and much sorrow. Even without the technology of today, Solomon saw this hundreds of years ago. Seemingly there are things we would be better off with if we just simply didn't know about them or didn't invent them. Well, Solomon did all his work, and he did all his studies and gathered all his knowledge. And then starting in verse 9 of chapter 2, well, let's start there. So I was great, he said, and increased more than all that were before me. I think is what it said. If I turn the page over here. Before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, he tells us. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of the spirit, and there was no profit in it under the sun. What Solomon is telling us here, I know is hard stuff. And it can be depressing if you dwell on what he's actually saying about life here. But as we read along, what we're doing is sharing and experiencing the futility of a man who is learning something very important. And he's trying to help us to understand it as well. He's trying to help us to understand the futility of all the things that he did. He wants us to learn it so we don't have to learn it the hard way like he did. Most of the stuff in our lives that we chase around and strive for in this life really doesn't amount to a plug nickel. Oh, it seems important at the time. All those things I did growing up and through life, they seem very important at the time. But looking back, I can see that they weren't that important after all. When it comes time to depart this old world, there's nothing we got that can save us. Most of it will bring us no true joy, and it doesn't make our life any better. Most of it. Some of it maybe does. Now, we would be happier, I think, if we would declutter our lives from all the vanities that we seek as human beings and seek rather the things which really can make a difference. And that's what Solomon is trying to tell us as we read along here. But Solomon basically says to enjoy your work. Enjoy the fruits of your labor. Enjoy your wife and your family and your husband, and enjoy your food and drink. And of all things, enjoy God who has made it possible for you, because that's all we're going to get. That's really important in this physical life. Now, we know there's more out there in eternity, but he's talking about the here and now, in this life. And the fact of the matter is, the things we give ourselves to beyond the basic joys of life, it's not going to buy us any eternity either. All we're buying us is grief, frustration, and pain, and then takes us away from the things which really matters. And even for those of us who by now should know better, those of us who by now who understand this world is only our training ground, and that's what it is. This is boot camp for us folks. This is boot camp for eternity. But some of us who should know better act as if though we've got to get everything we can now and strive to learn what it takes to do so. And again, I'm not against wisdom and knowledge, and we have to have a certain amount of worldly knowledge to navigate in this world. But we must focus our knowledge in the right direction if it's to ever truly be profitable for us. If we use it only as a means to obtain material things, then it takes us away from what really matters and what's really important, which is our God, our families, our creative work. And it takes us away from truly walking with our Creator. That's what striving after the wind will do. And the funny thing is, you can even do that with the Bible. When you start chasing after certain doctrines and prophecies and all the things of the future, you can become like the Pharisees by placing importance on all the wrong things and forgetting what it is to be a true Christian. And I hope we all know what that is. And if you don't, read Matthew 22, 37 through 40. I'm not going to read it. You can read it yourself. We do this and we don't pay any attention to a man like Solomon. Solomon tells us in chapter 8:17, even though you may seek and labor, you cannot find out all there is to know about God. And any wise man who thinks he knows all about God, well, he won't find it all out either. We cannot know how it's all going to work out. Oh yes, we can read the Bible, and we can get this vague outline of how things are going to be. But as the Apostle Paul says, we see through a glass darkly. Therefore, when we seek to know, and some of us think we know, then we have missed the whole picture. And there's nothing wrong with seeking to know God. We should seek to know God. But when we make it our prime directive and somehow think we know all there is to know about God, then we have missed out on what a true Christian is truly all about. That is one of the lessons Job and his friends had to learn. They each thought they knew how God was supposed to act or to react to any and each situation. Job's friends falsely accused him of some great sin, and he was being punished for it. Job, on the other hand, he wanted an audience with God to argue his case that he had done nothing to deserve what was happening to him. And he hadn't done anything. What they didn't realize, and what we sometimes don't realize, is God is so much greater than we are. And he showed Job that. God created us. We belong to God. And to want to argue with him is a foolish gesture. Job knew this, yet he still wanted to reason with God. Let's turn over to Job right quick. You see, hold your place here. If I can get my... There. That'll suffice for me. Let's go to Job here just a minute. Job... see, where do we want to go? Job 2. Job 2 and 10. $2.10, not $1.10, Arden. That's not right either. Let me see here. Job 9. Far cry from Job 2, isn't it? Job 9. can't read my own writing. He says, I know it's so of a truth. But how should man be just with God? If he will contend with him, he cannot answer him one of 1,000. So we see Job knew that you couldn't contend with God, but yet that's what he wanted to do. He is wise in heart and mighty in strength, who has hardened himself against him that has prospered, speaking of himself, which removes the mountains, and they know not, which overturns them in his anger, which shakes the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof tremble, which commands the sun, and it rises not, and seals up the stars, who alone spreads out the heavens, and treads upon the waves of the sea, which makes Arcturus, Arcturus, Orion, and Pleiades, speaking of some of the constellations, and the chambers of the south, which does great things past finding out, yea, and wonders without number. Lo, he goes by me, and I see him not. He passes on, but I perceive him not. Job knew you couldn't contend with God, as we see here. He knew he couldn't understand to know all there was to know about God. But he wanted to argue and plead his case anyway. And that's just like us humans. And in verse 11, if you want to go over there, verse 11:7, he says, can you by searching find out God? Can you find out the Almighty unto perfection? Well, can you by searching find out God? Can you find out God unto perfection? The answer should be obvious. No, we cannot. As of right now, we cannot fully know God and all that He is about. God has set eternity in our hearts. And we long to know, don't we? But He has done it in such a way that we, as of now, cannot find out the end of it all. Because when you think about it, there is no end to eternity. But what we can know is how to live our life now. For God is watching how we live our life now. And He's going to assume that that is how we're always going to live our life. Christ tells us in some of His parables about the pounds and the talents. If you're faithful in a little, then you will be faithful in much. If you're unfaithful in little, then you will be unfaithful in much. God, so to speak, is weighing us. He's checking us out in this life as we live our lives in the here and now. And from this, He can make an assessment as to how we will perform in the future, into the next world, or whatever, and what all He has planned for us. It has nothing to do with how well we can articulate prophecy down to the fine details to the point of dotting the last I. And there's nothing wrong with studying prophecy. We need to study prophecy. God tells us to watch as prophecy comes to pass. However, I, for one, am open-minded about prophecy. For things may not turn out exactly like we think. But a lot of people get bogged down with such things as prophecy. They make it their life study, and dates and times, and how each commandment and doctrine of God is to be carried out. And they lose all track of how they should be living, truly living a Christian life, about loving God and loving their neighbors as themselves, which Christ says hangs all the laws. That's what all the laws hangs on, all the commandments, including prophecy and doctrine. They forget about living a righteous life, loving their families, loving your spiritual family, and doing good works, which is what a Christian should do in this life. All the things which Jesus laid out for us, which is how our life should actually work in the here and now. We can get away from that. if we're not careful. Now, it's not that we shouldn't be interested in the world to come and prophecy, for we should. We should, but most of the teachings of Jesus was about how to live your life and how we interact with our brethren and our neighbors, not tomorrow, but today. Solomon here in verse 12 of chapter 2, let's go back over there, back to Ecclesiastes. Verse 12, I think. He said, I turned myself to behold wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do that comes after the king? Even that which has already been done. I mean, Solomon, he did it all. Anybody that came after him, he wasn't going to top what Solomon done. He says, then I saw that wisdom excels folly as far as light excels darkness. Oh yes, wisdom is better than folly, that's true. A wise decision is better than a foolish one. A wise actions is far better than foolish actions. Verse 14, he says, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. And I myself perceive also that one event happens to them all. He says wisdom is better than foolishness, but the same things is going to happen to me, he says. It's that fool out there in the end. 15. Then said I in my heart, as it happens to the fool, so it happens even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart, this is also vanity. He's asking himself, why has God given me all this wisdom? What good is it to me when I'm going to die like everybody else? Wisdom is good, folks, but it can't help the man who's got it when it's time to go. Or can it? Solomon is talking about worldly wisdom here, all the stuff that he'd learned. The kind of wisdom which only serves to puff people up and blow their egos out of proportion. The kind of wisdom which is indeed vain wisdom. But there is a wisdom which is not vain, folks. There is a wisdom which will help us in the end. And that wisdom is the wisdom of God. The wisdom of His laws and His ways as it pertains to our salvation and our way of life now. This is the wisdom we should seek, for all other will end in nothing but grasping for the wind. Therefore Solomon said, verse 17, therefore I hated life, because the work that was wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of the spirit. Yea, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it to another, unto the man that shall be after me. I don't think Solomon became suicidal or anything, but he just got tired of it all. All the building, all the orchards, all the pools, all the gardens he created, all the beautiful things, all that he did brought no satisfaction to his soul after he grew older, because he was striving after the wrong things, the wrong kind of knowledge. And all that he did, he was a very depressed person, just as a lot of people are today. He says, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun. All the beautiful things he created, he had no pleasure in them. He hated them, he says. Because you see, true happiness, folks, does not exist in stuff. It does not exist in the stuff you own or the stuff you have created or in your bank account. That's why there are so many miserable people in the world. They seek to find happiness in all the physical things they can amass in this life, not realizing it's just wind. Solomon probably got more enjoyment out of building all these projects than he did after they were finished. And another thing, Solomon had all these women, but you know, he never had a good solid relationship with any of them. He was too busy devoting his time to all these other projects. And you must devote time to your wife or your husband, your family, if you are to have a good relationship, which is something that is important in this life. And all the time he spent on these projects also caused his relationship with God to suffer. We all can relate to that if we think about it. For when we get busy with all our busy lives and all the stuff in our lives, we tend to forget about God, don't we? We have a hard time finding time to devote to God when we really get busy. It seems to be the point Solomon is driving at concerning this life, that the things which are important are simple and are few and far between. Now, first of all, we do have to earn a living. And I'm an old farmer, and I enjoy raising food and processing that food for future use. However, you know, I hate to rush at it. It's not enjoyable if I have to rush at it. For when you rush at anything, it seems to never get done right. I enjoy those things. I enjoy my work if I can take the time to do it right, if I don't have to rush at it. We have to learn to earn a living. You have to build a good, solid relationship with your family in this life. That's important. And that would include your spiritual family as well. But first and foremost, you have to build a good, solid relationship with God. Because if you don't, the rest won't amount to a hill of beans, folks. Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 13, he said, though I have the gift of prophecy, though I could understand all things out in the future, and though I understand all mysteries and all knowledge and faith to move mountains, if I don't have love, he says, and he's talking about the same kind of love that God has, godly love. If I don't have that, he says, I'm nothing. It's all just worthless. Means nothing. So we must get our perspective right as to what really matters in this life. For it is possible to get our perspectives wrong even when we study the Bible. Do we study the Bible only to gain knowledge so we can go out here and argue with other people? I've known people that did that. Or do we study it for personal correction and learn how to live that righteous life that we should be living? Again, if we seek wisdom, earthly wisdom, or even spiritual wisdom for the wrong reasons, it's all just for wind, folks. Then in chapter 3, after Solomon makes the statement about there's a time for this and a time for that, we come to verse 10 here in chapter 3. He says, I have seen the travail which God has given to the sons of men to be exercised in it. He has made everything beautiful in his time. Also, he has set the world in their heart. And that's actually a bad translation there. So that no man can find out the work that God makes from the beginning unto the end. What he's saying is God has made everything to suit its time. He has given man a sense of time past and future, but no comprehension of the completeness of his work from beginning to end. Again, we only see through a glass darkly. We understand a little bit of it, but not the completeness of God. Solomon had come to the conclusion that there was no good in all this futile knowledge of trying to figure out all this stuff which went on in the past. The knowledge about the dinosaurs, what killed them off, and all this knowledge about the planets and the solar systems. Now that's interesting, yes. And then you've got people out here digging up every dead person that's ever died 100 years back, and trying to figure out what killed them. And, I'll admit some of this is interesting. But knowing all this doesn't get us any points with God. God doesn't care if we know all about the planets at this time, the distance between them, how many moons each has, if any, and all the supernovas and black holes and all that stuff. It's interesting, but it don't get us any points with God. That's knowledge that we don't need to understand right now. All of this is just wind at this time. There will be enough time for all that if we make it into the kingdom. Right now we are to eat and drink and enjoy the good of our labors. Enjoy what we produce. Enjoy our families. Enjoy our relationship with God and our spiritual family while we are seeking eternity. We really do complicate our lives way too much, folks, if you think about it. Verse 14. I know that whatsoever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be put to it, nor anything taken from it. And God does it that men should fear before him, or rather, they should stand in awe of God. Verse 15. That which has been is now, and that which is to be has already been. And God requires that which is past. Or rather, he's going to require justice for it. 16. And the moreover I saw under the sun the place of judgment, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. He's saying, I went to the courts, and wickedness was there. I went to the churches, and iniquity was there. And if you think about it, that's the way it is. Verse 17. I said in mine heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, and there is a time there for every purpose and for every work. Everything is involved in vanity. It's going to die, he's telling us. Drop on down to verse 20. He says, all go to one place. All are of the dust, and all turn to dust again. Who knows the spirit of man that goes upward, and the spirit of the beast that goes downward to the earth? Wherefore I perceive that there is nothing better than a man should rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. Now he's talking about in this life. For who shall bring him to see what shall be after him? You die, your dog dies, and we all turn to dust. Who shall know if the spirit of man goes upward and the animal goes downward? And he's asking a question there. And no one knows what's going to happen to us after death. Now, I know that we know about our spiritual life after death, but he's talking about everyday things. Nobody knows what's going to, when we die, nobody can tell us what's going to happen tomorrow after we die, or the week after, or the month after. That's what he's talking about. Solomon says a lot of things in this book, and of course we don't have time to read them all. Wish we did, but let's go on over chapter 11 towards the end here. Verse 1. He says, cast your breads upon the waters, for you shall find it after many days. Now, this is a statement we seldom, concentrate on. He seems to be saying sometimes we just have to give things to change. There's a lot of things in life you just have to put on the water, so to speak, and let it go, and trust that somehow you'll find it later on down the stream in life. And life is like that sometimes. We can't control everything which comes down upon us. There's a time in which we just have to take it as it comes. And that's what I've had to do with this accident. I've had to, that's what I've had to do with the loss of my hand and part of my arm. Verse 2, give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for you know not what evil shall be upon the earth or come upon you. So when he's talking about casting your bread upon many waters and giving a portion to 7 or 8, he seems to be talking about just plain charity. Cast your bread on the waters. Give to the people when you can, for there may come a time when you will need them. Jesus tells us in Luke 16:9, he says, make yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when you fail, that you may receive, or they may receive you into everlasting habitation. He's telling us to use our worldly wealth to win friends for ourselves, so that when money is a thing of the past, we may be received into a good home. Use your money to make some friends out there, for one day you might need them. For if we isolate ourselves and hold on to everything we've ever amassed, you're not going to have any friends. You have to be charitable to other people if you ever expect anyone to be charitable to you, should you need it. It's a simple concept. Verse 3, if the clouds be full of rain, they empty themselves upon the earth, and if the tree falls towards the south or towards the north in the place where the tree falls, there it shall be. Stuff happens, people. Time and chance. It happens to us all. It did to me, and I have to accept that. I can't blame God. I can't blame the other people because I simply cannot remember. I can't even blame myself, again, because I can't remember. It was an accident. Stuff happens. The rain comes. It saturates the ground, and the tree falls wherever it falls. Things happen in our lives, and we have to deal with it. You play cards, you're dealt a hand, then you have to play the hand you're dealt. I know this is hard to accept sometimes, but that's what we have to do. And when you're dealt a bad hand, don't blame God, but always remember He's there to help you through it. That seems to be what Solomon is trying to tell us. We have to deal with life day by day, whatever happens. And now we come to a concept which I personally can understand. Verse 4. He that observes the wind shall not sow, and he that regards the clouds shall not reap. You can't always wait for perfect weather, folks, to do things. You can't, or the perfect time to do something. You can't always wait for the perfect weather to sow your crops, because if you don't get them sown by a certain time, they're not going to have time to mature. And you can't always wait for a sunny day to reap your harvest, for if you let it sit out there too long, it's going to rot in the fields. So sometimes we have to go through a little inconvenience in life if we are to make it truly work. Sometimes we have to do the best we can do, and hope for the best. This is what Solomon is telling us. Verse 6. In the morning sow your seed, and in the evening withhold not your hand, for you know not whether it shall prosper, either this or that, or they both shall be alike good. Get out there, he's telling us, and do something. and hope for the best. You can't just sit around and procrastinate. If you do nothing, then nothing will ever get done in your life. I've lost one of my hands. And I could sit around and I could feel sorry for myself. But if I did nothing, nothing would ever get done. When I come up against a problem which takes both hands, I have to invent some way to do it with one. Y'all know what this is? It's a pop opener. Well, you take the small end and you put it through the buttonhole on your pants, and you reach over and you grab the button, pull it over there and twist it sideways, and it goes through there slick as grease. You have to learn a way to do things. And now, no farmer, everybody don't carry a pocket knife. But you know, you have to hold a pocket knife with one hand, take your thumbnail and put it in the little groove of the blade and pull it out. Well, I can't do that, so I got this little knife. It has a thumb thing on it. I can open it with one hand and I can close it with one hand. A farmer has to have one to cut hay strings and stuff. And hay strings will dull a knife blade quicker than anything. So I had to take a board. I couldn't hold my wet rock. My wet rock's about that long, about that wide. So I had to take a board and put my whetstone on there and make a little cradle for it to hold it so I can lay it in my lap and it don't slide everywhere. You have to come up with things. When you come up against a problem, you know, you have to invent some way to do it. Try tying a tie with one hand. It may not be the prettiest, but you can see it can be done. I've got this big clothespin. I put my tie around my neck, and I take that big it's a big, huge clothespin. You've never seen one that big, I don't guess. But I clip the small end of my tie to my shirt, then I work the rest of it around and tighten it up, and it works, you know. Zip in your coat. Try that one with one hand. But I found out a way to do it. When I say nothing will ever get done in your life, I'm talking about the things we were created for, folks. We were created to enjoy the fruits of our labor. God created us to enjoy our families, for they picture something in the future. He created us to walk with Him and to have a relationship with Him. And all those other things we seek are just wind. Verse 7 and 8. Truly the light is sweet, and a pleasant thing it is for the eyes to behold the sun. But if a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that comes is vanity. If you live long enough, folks, you're going to have some dark days, I guarantee you. They're going to come. Verse 9, he says, Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth, and walk in the ways of your heart, and in the sight of your eyes. But know, he says, for all these things God will bring you into judgment. And when I look back on my childhood, my teenage years, they truly were vanity, you know. Did things that God bring me into judgment for, I guess. He'll judge me for it, for all those stupid things. Then we come to chapter 12, the last chapter. Have to hurry here. And what he says in the first few verses here seems to me, and I could be wrong, but he seems to be applying what he's what he says as an analogy of the human mind and body. And I'll read from the New English Translation, for it makes it a little clearer. He says, verse 1 there, he says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And that seems to be the whole theme of Ecclesiastes, is for us to remember God in the days of our youth and not seek all this other useless, vain things like he did. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the time of trouble comes and the years draw near, when you will say, I see no purpose in them. And as we grow older, we do. We look back and we say, what in the world did I do that for? There's no purpose in that. Remember him before the sun and the light of day give place to darkness, before the moon and the stars grow dim, and the clouds return with the rain. You know, he seems to me to be saying that when we get older, our eyes grow dim and they get cloudy and water, and we can't see as good as we used to. Verse 3 and 4. When the guardians of the house tremble and the strong man stoops, when the woman grinding meal cease work because they are few, and those that look through the windows look no longer. When the street doors are shut, when the noise of the mill is low, when the chirping of the sparrow grows faint and the songbirds fall silent. He seems to be saying our inward parts don't work like they used to. Our heart doesn't beat as strong, and we don't hear as well as we used to. We can't hear the birds. Verse 5. When men are afraid of steep places, you know, when we get older, we tend to be careful of steep places. And the street is full of tares. When the blossom whitens on the almond tree, well, we get gray-headed, don't we? And the locust haunch is swollen. As we get older, a lot of us tend to get a belly on us, don't we? And the grasshoppers have no more zest. We can't hop around like a grasshopper anymore. We just don't have the energy. And then he says, for man goes to his everlasting home. Well, where's that? It's the grave. And mourners go about the streets, you know. This is talking about the things that lead up to death here. Verse 6 through 8 here, he says, remember him, speaking of God. Remember God before the silver cord is snapped and the golden bowl is broken. He's saying, remember God before you die, before the dust returns to the earth where it began and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. He's telling us to remember God, as I said, before we died, and to live this life according to God's purpose, and to live a good and righteous life. Because, folks, that's what we're going to be judged by. And Solomon undoubtedly was speaking of himself here in verse 9. He says, and moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he gave good heed and sought out and set in order many proverbs. Although he was getting older, he still taught the people, he says, and gave them good advice. He says, verse 10, the preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written was upright, even words of truth. What would that be? Well, the scriptures, or what he had at that time, the written word of God. He taught the people from the word of God. However, in verse 11, he says, the words of the wise are as goads, and as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. Well, a goad is like a sharp stick or something you use for poking something. To make an, you know, you can use it to make an animal, poke a cow or something, make it go where you want it to. He says that's the way the truth is. He says that's the way the Word of God is. The truth pokes at people, don't it? Truth pokes people for the fact they don't want to hear it to begin with. And then in verse 12, one further warning, my son, he says, the use of books is endless, and much study is wearisome. Again, he's speaking of this worldly wisdom, people. It's all, well, I asked a question. Is all worldly wisdom useless? No, it is not. For without some of it, we wouldn't know how to navigate through this world and earn a living, which also takes a certain degree of worldly wisdom. You know, the emphasis is all knowledge which doesn't pertain to our livelihood, and the knowledge of how to gain our salvation, Solomon says, is a vain thing. Verse 13, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. That's why we were created, folks, to learn about God. That's why we're here on this earth, to keep his commandments, that we might enter his family. Verse 14, for God shall bring every work into judgment, with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Now, I know many of us has to know many different things in this life. We have to have many different degrees of knowledge to survive in this world. I understand that. But whatever degree of knowledge we have about whatever the situation might be, let us focus it towards becoming a better Christian and living a good life, a good and righteous life, that we might enter the kingdom of God and not use it for all the vain purposes as Solomon did.